and welcome to Blythe Business News. For this edition, I'm joined by Michael Jones of Los Andes Copper. Los Andes traded on the Toronto Venture Exchange, the TSXV, and also traded on the OTC Market in North America. Michael, welcome back on the program. Now, you're sitting there in Chile with the Vizcachitas resource, something like 13 billion pounds of copper. Now, with that size of asset, how positive are you feeling about current market trends?
Well, it's been interesting to listen to all the rhetoric around copper. We've had a bit of an economic slowdown with interest rates and people looking at the markets very closely. I think in the medium term, it's important to remember where copper is going. That we're seeing an enormous amount of urbanization and electrification across the world, and most of the analysts would agree in the medium term out to 2030, we're going to see something like 5 million tons of copper short that the world needs that we're not producing. And these assets are getting much harder to find and develop around the world. And so having one that's ready to go and move forward is a rare thing, especially at that kind of scale, as you mentioned.
Now, you mentioned there global electrification, which continues as a very high priority both for governments and indeed for populations. Just explain for the viewers, what is copper's role in the electrification process?
Well, of course, copper connects everything together. So whether you're talking about renewables on one end or on charge points in the other, they're all linked together with a network of copper. And one of the big changes that people need to remember is that if you have a large power plant, say burning coal, might generate megawatts of power. That's one wire, albeit a sizable one, to connect into the grid. If you're going to talk about renewables, you're really talking about a whole bunch of small sources that all have to be connected. There's estimates up to 20 times the amount of copper that's needed per megawatt of energy. And on the demand side, the same thing. You're not talking about big industrial users now. You're talking about the average consumer moving their vehicle around with electricity, and those are charge points, which is a lot of copper. There are some replacement opportunities with things like aluminum on some of the transmission lines, but you really can't beat copper for its essential role in electrification.
So, an essential metal, the world is electrifying. You're sitting there with this enormous resource. Give us an update, if you can, what you're doing with it. What's happening at Vizcachitas?
Well, we're at a very interesting stage because we've completed a preliminary economic assessment. It gives us a value, an independent assessed value at an 8% discount rate of about 2.7 billion US dollars. So it's a very exciting time where we have this pre-feasibility study in the works, which is the next step of engineering up the curve. So this gives investors a higher degree of certainty as to what the resource and the mine plan will be. Capital cost estimates will be updated and so on. And we're targeting completion of that pre-feasibility study in the fourth quarter this year.
You mentioned the drill program. Can you give us any hint at all at what that might be telling you?
Well, of course, put the assays out when they're out. But, this is an enormous system. Actually, if we have a look, Tim, at some of these details, we can show this visually. The Vizcachitas project is located at 1,900 meters elevation, which is not that high. And it's nearby the coast as well, and a lot of infrastructure. So we're actually just 120 kilometers from Santiago, and we're near 3 different ports that the concentrate can go out of. So that's one of the things that really distinguishes the project is its excellent location and infrastructure. It's a massive land position with over 400 square kilometers, and you can get an idea of the amount of drilling done here. But what's incredible is there's only 60,000 meters of drilling, and a lot of these higher grade intercepts with classic porphyry copper mineralization are just sitting hanging in space. They're not closed off by subsequent drill holes. So when we look at the resource model, for example, more than 0.7% copper and then more than 0.5% copper, it really goes out to the edge of our drilling, and there are noticeable gaps where there just aren't more drilling holes to close off the overall resource. As I mentioned, it's a 1.2 billion ton measured and indicated resource with 13 billion pounds of copper equivalent. The preliminary economic assessment did a good job of assessing this. And when we look at this pit, we can see opportunities, a lot of mineralization, more than 0.5% copper outside the initial pit, and then the ultimate pit coming in at a 45-year mine life. So this is truly a tier 1 world-class asset in copper.
So what's next? What's coming up for Los Andes Copper?
We got the engineering update at the fourth quarter. So we think it's going to be quite an exciting time as these milestones get passed. And we've had a lot of interest in the asset. I have to say, if you look at the bigger companies around the world, they're all looking for copper. And they have a number of bright line tests. You know, they really want to see something with more than 10 billion pounds of copper that can produce 150,000 tons a year of copper or more, and something with a long mine life and a clean concentrate that can go into the smelters. If you run that screen, there are very few assets in the world that can actually pass that test. And our asset in Los Andes Copper is one of those.
Well, Michael, thanks for that update. We look forward to hearing from you again. That was Michael Jones of Los Andes Copper, updating us on where he is with the Vizcachitas project, the copper project in Chile. That's it from Blythe Ray Business News for this edition. Thanks for watching.